Good evening, everyone. I'm Amy Kerwin, the Artistic Director of Southampton Arts Center. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for The Social Dilemma, How Digital Media Undermines Young People's Well-Being and What We Can Do About It, hosted by the Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood. And I just want to say that we're so pleased to be able to partner with CCFC for this. It's great to have experts who can collaborate with us and do all the hard work. So I'm very appreciative of their collaboration and for putting together this wonderful panel tonight. And we're thrilled that so many people were interested in it. It's obviously a very important topic. And if you had the chance to watch The Social Dilemma, I'm sure you're eager to learn more. And perhaps you're as terrified as I was after seeing it. You wanted to immediately deactivate your Facebook page. But anyway, so I'm sure it's going to be an incredible program. And thank you again for joining us. So I just wanted to say that we hope you also take a look at what Southampton Arts Center does. We're just finishing up our year. We have an exhibition called 2020 Vision, which is on view now through the end of the year through December 27th. Our galleries are open Friday to Sunday, 12 to 5. So if you're in Southampton, come check it out. It's obviously a very timely exhibition. And I wanted to mention that next week we have another Zoom panel discussion on Thursday the 17th at 7 p.m., which I will actually be moderating. It's all about breaking into show business for anybody who's interested in starting a career in the arts, the performing arts, in film, the arts world. And we have an incredible panel of artists from different fields, including composer Carter Burwell, artist Peter Drake, photographer Deborah Feingold, filmmaker Mary Lambert, actress, singer, and author Gloria Rubin, and author of The Art of Racing in the Rain, Garth Stein. So that's next Thursday, the 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can find that on southamptonartscenter.org. So always got to do a shameless plug, can't help it. But anyway, so that's it. Please do check us out. Follow us on Instagram, and as much as we don't want to be on social media, it's certainly helpful for us. But I'm now very happy to bring in Jean Rogers and the rest of the panelists to take it from here. And quick housekeeping note. Please, if you have questions, we prefer that you would put them in the Q&A field as opposed to the chat field. That's much easier for us to keep track of them. So please do try to use the Q&A field for questions, which we will get to at the end. We'll do as many as we can. And that's really all. That's the most important thing. Just use the Q&A field to ask your questions and enjoy. So I'm going to go away now and I'm bringing you Jean.
Sorry, I had a little trouble getting my video started. Hello, everyone. I'm Jean Rogers. I'm the director of the Children's Screen Time Action Network at Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood and your moderator for this evening's panel. You know, in our work, we see many films on technology and its grip on humanity. But when we viewed The Social Dilemma, we found it to be different, spellbinding, terrifying, as Amy said, because it plainly acknowledges that the business model is what's altering human behavior and human interaction. Everyone's experience with technology is different, and we don't prescribe, but we do present food for thought. And tonight we expect to present a deeper dive into smartphones and social media and how they've changed lives, and what we can learn about this thought-provoking film, The Social Dilemma. So I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. Larissa Rhodes is the film's producer. She's the Director of Creative Development at Exposure Labs, where she creates projects that catalyze social impact. She recently produced Chasing Coral, a feature film about our changing ocean environment. We're thrilled to have her today to shed light on the film's creation. Welcome, Larissa.
Thank you, Jean.
And Josh Golan is the Executive Director of Campaign for Commercial Free Childhood, where he leads advocacy efforts that protect children's privacy rights and works with regulators and legislators to ensure that childhood is based on children's needs, not corporate profits. Welcome, Josh, and I'll let you get us started with our first clip.
Thank you, Jean. So we thought we would start by showing the trailer for the film for those of you who have not seen the film, to give you a sense of what it's about. And if you have seen the film, maybe this will be a quick refresher before we dive into the conversation. So without further ado.
When you go to Google and type in "climate change is," you're going to see different results depending on where you live and the particular things that Google knows about your interests.
That's not by accident, that's a design technique.
What I want people to know is that everything they're doing online is being watched, is being tracked. Every single action you take is carefully monitored and recorded.
A lot of people think Google's just a search box and Facebook's just a place to see what my friends are doing. What they don't realize is there's entire teams of engineers whose job is to use your psychology against you.
I was the co-inventor of the Facebook like button.
I was the president of Pinterest,
Google, Twitter, Instagram.
There were meaningful changes happening around the world because of these platforms. I think we were naive about the flip side.
Sorry to interrupt, but it's not actually showing the video.
Oh, I apologize. I'm not sure what's happening. Maybe we should just jump into discussion.
Can you first open up the video and then close out your this box here?
Josh, you might be just sharing the wrong screen.
When you go to Google and type in "climate change is," you're going to see different results.
I will get it right for the next
and the
clip,
particular
but
things that Google knows about your interests.
That's not.
I apologize. I think we should just get going.
That's fine, that's fine. So Larissa, we're hoping that most of our audience has seen the film. I've actually seen it twice. I think I'm going to watch it a third time because I saw so many things in it. But it seems that there's a general societal awareness now that's coming to light that these problems with social media have been escalating, but little bit of that knowledge is about the root causes of it. So can you tell us what inspired you to make such a revealing film and why now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you so much for having me tonight. I think for us, it really was an exploration. Documentary and filmmaking is such a wonderful and joyous passion and ability to have a career in, because we get to interview subjects and we get to learn as we go. And so for us, this was really an exploration. Jeff Orlowski, the director of the film Social Dilemma, had known Tristan Harris, one of the subjects of the film, through school, but ironically saw a social media post that Tristan posted early on, just kind of raising the flag and the alarm bells as to, the potential harms and downsides of social media and search technologies. And at that point, it kind of catalyzed in our team this, journey of trying to figure out, well, what is really going on? And is this really, he used the words like an existential crisis. Is this really that scale and scope? And I think as we started to learn, we recognized that, yes, indeed, the way that these technologies are puppeteering and orchestrating our lives, there's a comparison that was used to climate change. A lot of our work was actually in climate change. And as we see corporations extracting our natural environment for profit, and in doing so are decimating those ecosystems, we're seeing a very similar thing happen. This surveillance capitalism, these advertising-driven business models are using humanity as a raw resource, extracting our thoughts, our ideas, our behaviors, and that data to better, profit from. And as a result, they're destroying our information ecosystems, our social, societal fabrics. So I think the scope and scale of this project became quite clear to us. And then it just became a journey of trying to figure out, well, how do we visualize what we've learned?
That must have been quite a journey. As you say, the scope and scale, I think, is what's making it creates such a buzz, why so many people are talking about it, because I think they're blown away. Josh, you know, we've seen a lot of films about media overuse in our work and screen obsession over the past several years. Why do you think this particular film has had such an incredible impact?
Well, let me start with the most obvious, which is that, you know, Larissa and her team did an incredible job. And you know, I think it tells the story so powerfully. And I think we'll talk about some of the, you know, ask Larissa about some of the artistic choices that they made, and I think they made the right ones. And so I think that's part of it. But I think there's more to it than that. I mean, first of all, I think it comes at the right time, right? First, we've seen a shifting cultural landscape over the past couple of years, where first, you know, everybody was just in love with social media because of how they could connect to people, but also because, you know, people's 401ks were going up, and we know that almost nobody has a good relationship with social media, like a perfect relationship. There are things about it that people don't like, about what it does to them, about how they act when they're on it, about how it changes the way they think. I mean, if you spend time on Twitter, you think in tweets. Like, who wants to think in 140 characters? Or 280, I guess we're up to now. That's not a particularly engaging or deep way to think. And I apologize if you hear my dog barking a little bit. She just got upset about something. But I think the other thing about this is that we see all the time, we see these, you know, these films, they do a great job of illustrating how some of the negative effects of it, but they located everything in the personal. So they treat it all about, this is just a matter of better parenting or better communication between parents and children. And what we understand, and what this film does such a good job of showing, is that it's much more than about our individual choices. That it's much, oh my gosh, that it's much more than about, I'm gonna have to let her out, so I'm going to stop my answer for 1 second. And Jean, you can go on to Larissa, and I'll come back.
Well, we'll have Josh back. I know that he has more to share with us. But Larissa, you know, when I saw the film the first time, I was so struck by the dramatization that just makes all that revealing information that the tech insiders share with you, and all throughout the film, it makes it so real, brings it right into the family. And I was struck by, you know, the preteen girl whose self-esteem was so wrapped up in the social media. But the film really goes to lengths to show how social media companies get a grip on these young people and get them hooked on their devices. Can you talk a little bit about those scenes where the executives were discussing how to get Ben onto his phone, how to keep him there, and delivering those algorithms? It was so intriguing.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. And I think, you know, Josh is right. The film came at the right time. There was a lot of groundwork that has been laid by organizations and activists and researchers that sort of were standing on the shoulders of the giants of this community. And we're not the only film out there. So just recognizing that as well. There's a number of incredible films that I encourage people to watch. I think for us, we were trying to figure out, how do we reveal what's invisible? How do we reveal what's going on the other side of your screen, when we were starting to learn about, you know, algorithmic oppression or how decisions were being made? We also were trying to better understand and visualize for ourselves when you start to see some of the technology decisions that are being made, these design decisions that are made by a small group of people, you know, mostly in Silicon Valley, of a specific age, a specific demographic, you really get a sense of potential. You know, a lot of these people didn't necessarily start out to, you know, destroy democracy or are hoping to, you know, rip apart children's mental health. But a lot of these downstream consequences are happening. And so we were trying to figure out, how do we visualize it? How do we showcase those decisions that are being made? And, you know, you mentioned these sort of three algorithms that we anthropomorphized. Those are actual algorithms within some of these companies. There are growth algorithms. There are revenue algorithms. These algorithms drive the business model and the content then that thus we see on our feeds. So it was really also a hope to be a little entertaining, to try to bring a little levity to an issue that really is quite dark and daunting. And there isn't a lot of, you know, comedy to be had, but for us, it was really trying to showcase that there are decisions that are being made that in one hand seem like a really helpful thing, you know, a Snapchat streaks. We want to show people how that they can have really good friends and show who your best friend is. But the flip side of that is when we were talking to, you know, parents and hearing that their kids were going on vacation and then asking their friends to log in for them so that they wouldn't lose their streaks, or like mentally having, you know, detachment issues. I think that's when we start to see that these designs are actually not helping or benefiting in the way that maybe was originally hoped.
That's so interesting, Larissa. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, no, if I could just jump in, and
Yeah.
what I was starting to say before I got so really interrupted by my dog was was that I think that one of the things that resonates with it is when you watch the film, you understand that all of the problems that we're seeing, they're not all of our fault, that there are deliberate design changes that have been made, and that it doesn't have to be this way. I think that's one of the hopeful things about the film, is that we, you know, it would be possible to build social media that connects all of us, that, you know, that helps us stay informed, but does so in a way that isn't, that doesn't make, you know, being on the screen all the time the driving mechanism of the platforms, you know, that platforms that informed us, that connected us, and then helped us break away from them. And I think when you talk about children, that is particularly what they need. You know, we talk a lot about it, the campaign for commercial-free childhood, and I think you see this so well in the film, is that the media that our kids spend so much time on wasn't built for them. It was built for advertisers. And I think, you know, if we're talking about social media, you know, I think one of the most striking things about social media is that it quantifies popularity. I can look at Eugene and instantly tell how many friends you have. I can tell if Larissa posts a picture on Instagram. I can see instantly, you know, what people think of that picture. And if a 10-year-old posts a picture on Instagram, she gets instant feedback on whether she's looking hot or not in that picture. Like, that's what happens on Instagram. And I think that if any of us were building social media for teens as a place to connect, like particularly during a pandemic, we all need to connect right now, we wouldn't quantify popularity. We wouldn't reproduce the high school cafeteria experiment. And so I think one of the reasons why this film is resonating so deeply with people is it helps them see that the problems that we're having with social media were things that were deliberately engineered, and that there is another way, and that, you know, we can be a little easier on ourselves. That doesn't mean we don't have to take real drastic steps to limit our children's exposure and to develop our own healthier relationships, but we can really take a breath and say, you know what, we did not create this problem. And I think that can be empowering to people.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more, Josh. And I think it is this seemingly similar, again, I always use comparisons to the environment. The plastic pollution problem is such a great example. Very similar to that, we feel the need to, you know, make sure that we're not using plastic bags when we go to the grocery store, or, you know, recycle our water bottles when you know, we're sort of poking holes and trying to plug them as the dam is overflowing with the amount of plastic. We're not going to the source and saying we need to stop using fossil fuels to produce these things. In the very same way, recognizing that we can do all of the things we want to try to turn off notifications, create protections for our children on screen time and limitations. But the reality is that they were designed in a way that is meant to manipulate and use our psychology against us to be able to profit from it. And I think you're right, that advertising driven model is never going to be something that can be solely overcome by an individual.
Larissa, I think that you mentioned before that was a downstream consequence, and it's really interesting to think that these algorithms were designed for good to begin with, and that we're hopeful, but then that they never anticipated that it would have such a negative effect, especially on children. And you know, as I mentioned, the middle school girl was a shock to me, but then the brother, the freshman in high school, the older sister. Josh, can you tell us a little bit about how it begins in early childhood, maybe what we don't see in the film? Because for us in our work, this film is like a cautionary tale to parents of young children.
Yeah, and I think that so one of the things is that there has just been an explosion of screen use among younger children, and what we've seen in particular is since the advent of mobile devices. I mean, it's hard to remember, right? That it was only a few years ago we didn't have smartphones, we didn't have tablets. But since the advent of these things, we now have children who are not only consuming more media, because what the research shows us is that it hasn't completely dispersed TV. So they're still watching TV, but now they're watching the iPad and they're watching the smartphone and they're playing video games on top of that. But what we also know is now they're increasingly watching by themselves. And so what we have now is young children watching a lot of media by themselves on these smaller devices with less interaction with family members, with less interaction with parents. And what happens is that kids don't have the opportunity to, it displaces all sorts of things that's really good for kids. And among them is creative play, using your imagination. And I think perhaps the most important thing is becoming bored as a young child, and the amazing things that happen when children, or when any of us, allow ourselves to become bored and to think of ways to entertain ourselves and to deal with those moments of uncomfortableness. When we have this, and we're bored or anxious, this will always be the thing that we turn to. And so when children aren't developing that capacity to work their way through boredom, to entertain themselves, to act out their own stories and create their own stories, but only to see what other people are doing, that deprives them of the experiences that may act as that protective factor when they get to the age when they start going on social media. And you know, when they're on YouTube, which is the #1 place where younger children are, all of these persuasive design techniques that the film shows about, you know, Facebook and other sites like that are being used on YouTube. YouTube is figuring out what at that moment is the most compelling thing that we can send to a child in order to keep them on the screen. Now, again, I talked before about what would media look like if we built it for children instead of for advertisers. You would watch a video, a young child would watch a video and the screen would go black, or maybe it would say, you know, go read a book or go outside, but there wouldn't be this endless like list teed up of these absolutely compelling, perfectly tailored to that child choices coming up. And I think that what's happening in early childhood is making children really ill prepared for the onslaught that's going to come in the middle years. And so I think the more we can limit screen time in the early years and have children develop the sense of themselves, of their own identities, and to learn how to entertain themselves without a screen, the better they'll be prepared once they get to the point when it's time to go on Instagram, which unfortunately is also much too young. And I think that's the other thing that parents need to do, is delay that time before kids are getting their first social media accounts.
Absolutely, Josh. My word of the year was technovoidance. And I think that's what you're talking about when you're talking about, you know, the wish to not be uncomfortable, to not be bored. And maybe you could show us a clip now of the mental health dilemma.
Okay. I don't know why it's not showing. Maybe you can ask Larissa another question and I will swear I will get this going this time.
Absolutely. We'll give you a second. So, Larissa, as far as mental health, I know the film definitely evolved the mental health of the son, Ben, in the story. Can you talk a little bit about that character?
Yeah, so ironically, we wanted to, as a documentary, we wanted to ground everything in fact and truth. And I'm not sure if the viewers have read, there's a New York Times piece called The Making of a YouTube Radical. And it is a fascinating read, and I encourage people to do that. It's more of an experience, as you can scroll down and see, although some of the videos on YouTube have since been removed, you can watch as as YouTube will recommend different videos based on what you watch, and you hear the story of a real child, not a child, but I should say a teen, who basically became radicalized because of what they were watching on YouTube. And so that sort of, was one of the things we were thinking about when we were creating these characters, was really the various offshoots of issues that can occur as a result of social media. You mentioned earlier Isla, the young girl in the film whose social comparison is changing how she feels about herself. In the case of Ben, that character was really trying to showcase that the recommendation engines are not, without human oversight, are really kind of running rogue in a sense. And while we can play whack-a-mole trying to fix problems when we recognize that, there are recommendation engines, for example, that were recommending the live stream of the horrible mosque shooting in New Zealand, that video got recommended, so many times before the platforms were able to pull it down. And as a result, people downloaded it and then continued to re-upload it and share it. And, that's just one example of a video like that, that is traumatizing and horrifying. But the recommendation engines are the thing that are propelling and pushing without human oversight, without us thinking and saying, wait a second, where's the filter? Is this really what somebody wants to see? Our editor actually gave me a story when we were making this film. He was letting his child use YouTube for Kids, and walked away and came back and was startled to find that his child was watching a video of another child playing with a father. And it was just like heartbreaking for him to think, is this what my child is watching? Like, of all the things that they could be watching, this is what he wants, this personal physical interaction. And that the, whether it's unboxing videos or all sorts of things that, YouTube recommends, I think, I recall that I think there's a campaign that you all have run about Google and the App Store and the recommendations. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I think those are the types of things where we need to hold to account and say, these things are not okay for our children.
Yeah, and I can just jump in on that. One of the things that we do at the Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood is we do a lot of watchdogging of the of Silicon Valley and the products that they put out for children. And so the Google Play Store is curated, right? And so they make recommendations about these are the apps that are okay for children. And what studies have shown is that more than 50% of the apps that Google recommends for children are actually violating children's privacy law, so that they're collecting data that they shouldn't be from children and sharing that information with advertisers. And so we have filed a complaint at the Federal Trade Commission calling for an investigation of the Google Play Store, because ultimately, the ability of parents to ascertain on an app-by-app basis whether an app is violating their children's privacy. I don't know the last time any of you have gone and looked at a privacy policy. They're deliberately impossible to figure out. And so what we see, so what we are arguing and what we are pushing and what we are working with our allies in Congress for is for the FTC to hold Google responsible, because Google is the one that claims that they are vetting these apps for children, and they're actually not. Or if they are, they don't care the fact that this information is being shared with third-party advertisers. So we think it's really, really, and this is one of the things we like about the film as well, it's really important not to think about these, we can't do this on an app-by-app basis. If we're going to change the ecosystem, we need better laws and regulations, and we need to change the major players in the field. And I would put Google very much at the top of that list. All right, should we try this again?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Is that, it's like not here. I'm so sorry. All right. I really apologize, but I can't.
I can try to share it from my end. Oh, I guess the host may be disabled sharing. If somebody can make me the host, I'd be happy to try to share. Oh, there we go. I can share. Do you want to play the trailer or the other one?
The mental health dilemma, I think.
The mental health one. Okay, here is the mental health one, and hopefully this will work. Are you seeing what I'm seeing now?
They can't stop looking at social media.
Their brains have changed.
They become addicted.
And there's something very dangerous about that.
The number one problem, the number one psychiatric disorder among teenagers is anxiety. Typically, it's anxiety about needing to check in with social media.
Even though social media makes them more anxious, makes them more worried about missing out, they can't stop looking at it. That prefrontal cortex hasn't developed enough for them to be able to put it down, to say to themselves, it's not making me feel good.
The prefrontal cortex, this area of the brain that is involved in our cognitive control, our ability to process and direct our attention based on our goals, is the last part of our brain to develop.
This doesn't get completely myelinated until you're in your mid to late 20s.
So kids are getting these tools right when they have the least capability of actually controlling their behavior.
I think we can confidently say that it's changing the way that teens interact with each other, with peers, with the world, and that those changes in interactions lead to sort of changes in behaviors, changes in psychiatric and sort of mental health.
We should not be surprised. And it's not just because the culture changed. It's because their brains have changed. They also get trained in instant gratification by these devices. And there's something very dangerous about that, because in real life, we don't get everything that we want instantly.
They are bombarding our teenagers and our young adults with so much that they become addicted to the continuous input of stimulus and information.
We know that there are many activities that are critical for our development: face-to-face communication, physical activities, exposure to nature, and sleep. I would say that all of these are being threatened in some way by increasing access to information technology.
I think parents are in a really tough situation right now. I think because this tech has negative effects, they have to balance between trying to protect their kids, but also, let's face it, there's tremendous social pressure to use technology. And it's also incredibly important that children are technically literate. And I think there need to be more resources that help them make those decisions. And frankly, the companies need to be partially responsible, largely responsible, for ensuring that the use of these products is responsible.
There's so much there. The companies being responsible. That clip starts by talking about the prefrontal cortex, and we know that 80% of brain development happens in the first 3 years of life. And we know that screen time is happening younger and younger, and that the longer we can delay the use of it, the better solidified the brain development will be for the child to be able to handle what's coming along. But children's brains are developing into their early 20s. And, how does the parental smartphone use impact it as well? The lack of engagement between parents and kids, the separation of families due to this. Which one of you would like to jump in and talk about the family dynamic as far as the brain development and the mental health goes?
Josh, you take this one.
Well, I think, I think there's so much reason for concern. And I think a lot of parents have seen Jean Twenge's article in the Atlantic a few years ago, "Are Smartphones Ruining a Generation?" And I think many of us parents have ironically shared on social media the graphs from that article, which will show you a clear correlation between once the smartphone was introduced and social media became so big, and number of problems for teens, including anxiety and depression and even suicide. Now, of course, the disclaimer: correlation does not equal causation, but the correlation is undoubtedly there, and there's reason to think that the social media and the smartphones are playing a big role in that. One of the studies and statistics that gives me hope, though, is that more than half of teenagers wish that their parents would be on their phones less. And I think that's pretty powerful. When we think about teenagers, we probably mostly think about how they want to get as far away from us as possible. And the fact that teenagers are missing that connection, are missing that closeness, are noticing that their parents are disappearing into their phones, and that, you know, no longer are families all in one spot, but they're in 5 different rooms on 5 different screens. That's not just concerning to the parents, but also is concerning to the teens, I think is really exciting. And Jean, you've been doing such great work in our action network with teens who are becoming, and we've seen it in reaction to the film as well, where young people are becoming some of the loudest critics of social media and some of the biggest demanders of change. And to me, for young people who are so immersed in this stuff and for whose entire world can seem like it exists on social media, for them to be able to take that bird's eye view and say, wow, there's something really wrong here and we don't like what's going on with us and our peers and our families, is incredibly powerful and hopeful.
It certainly is, Josh, and we find that they are coming up with their own solutions. And we think as adults that, you know, we're talking up here, and Larissa, you said, oh, they're not children, they're teens, but we actually like to say they're children. There are children, you know, through their early 20s, there are children because, you know, advertisers came up with the word tweens. Age compression is definitely a part of social media. Getting kids to be able to dress older when they're younger, getting them to be able to buy things when they're younger, become consumers. It used to be that you had to have a paycheck to be considered a consumer. Now you're considered a consumer from birth. So the teens they're speaking out and they're saying, you know, talk to us. We're living it and we want to be able to have a say in it. And I bet you're hearing from them as well, Larissa, as a result of this film. I hope we have some watching this evening.
Yeah, I mean, we've really been blown away by the response to the film. We've had, you know, people writing us and saying that this, you know, finally gives a voice to the feeling that people, that, you know, as a young person that they've been feeling. We've also heard, you know, in Colorado, I think the statistic is from 2015 to 2017, and our team is based in Colorado. The leading cause of death for young people ages 10 to 17 is suicide. And again, as Josh mentioned, you know, there isn't causation data yet linking social media to suicide. But when I was a kid, you know, there was bullying, but the bullying didn't follow you home. And it didn't happen with everybody in the world being able to see and witness how mean people were being to you. You know, there was always sexual harassment in high school, but that sexual harassment was not, you know, put out in the world for the world to see. You know, there was also the feeling of being left out. This like FOMO is very real. And when I was a kid, you know, I wouldn't get invited to a party, but then I wouldn't sit at home and watch all of my friends who had been invited to that party, you know, scroll through and see live updates as that was happening. So I think that the context has just shifted so much, and the young people are really aware of that. And in some cases, I think you're right. They're more aware of it than their parents. And I think it's a real thing that all generations are going to have to face. You know, how much do we want our social media to be defined, our social world to be defined by these platforms? Jeff often jokes that, you know, Facebook has co-opted the word friend. I have a close number of friends. I don't have 10,000 friends. Those are acquaintances or colleagues or people that I know. So I think really starting to have some of these conversations with our communities, with our families, to be able to help us define, you know, what really defines my friendship, what really defines the relationships. And I think, as Josh mentioned, I'm a creative person. I find that I have the best creative ideas when I'm in the shower. And we interviewed Dr. Lustig in the film. He doesn't actually appear in the final film, but he appeared in that clip that we just watched. And he said, you know, why do you think it is that you would have those ideas? Because the phone follows you everywhere else in your life except for into the shower. You know, so I think that there's a lot of room for us to really redefine our relationships with our phones and with these platforms and technologies.
Some executive is watching this right now and thinking we need more waterproof phones so we can follow the rest into the shower.
Oh, they probably exist.
So when you started creating the film, Larissa, I bet you didn't anticipate it would be released during a global pandemic.
We certainly did not.
So, of course, these issues are exacerbated now. They're exacerbated for families and for all of us because the social connections are online full time. Have you had reactions to that? Have you had people discuss how releasing it during a pandemic may have been a tricky time for people to hear this message?
Absolutely. We premiered the film originally at Sundance in January and then opened up the film again to make some editing tweaks. As filmmakers, we want to make everything just the best it can be. And in the process of that, actually the pandemic began and we realized that, this was a real example of fake news and misinformation. And we wanted to include that in the film. So we re-edited that. And then really felt strongly that the film needed to come out this year as it's influencing, so many parts of our society. But there really is a question, recognizing now that parents don't always have another option. School is now mandatory online for so many people. I think it is a real question to try to figure out, how do I manage and mitigate how these platforms are influencing and engaging with my family. I think one of the things that we've recognized and one of the subjects of the film Aza was sharing with us is that now more than ever, because our lives are so defined by these platforms and social media, we need to understand how they work. And how they may not work for our benefit because we're living our lives through them, we're getting our information through them, we're connecting and communicating through them more than almost anything else. So I think when it comes to currently in the pandemic, I don't envy any parent who is trying to make the decision of, how do I make sure my kid has the education they need while having the screen time that is mandatory by their teachers. I think that's also something else you've been working on as well with education and technology. And I'm not sure if you want to talk about that, but I think it is a difficult decision. And more than anything, I just encourage people to better understand the technologies that they're being asked to use. And then using their voice to call for whether it's regulation or a change in design, or working with organizations like yours to demand that they're working in the favor of the users and not for the profit of a small portion of people.
Great. Josh, can you speak a little bit to our initiatives around COVID and education?
Sure. So, I do think this is obviously such an interesting and unusual time to be talking about technology, and technology has been in many ways a lifeline during this pandemic, right? It's allowed kids to continue education in some form. It's allowed Jean and I to continue our jobs at the Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood safely without being exposed to COVID, and and it's allowed people to connect when they were very social, when we had to be socially isolated for public health reasons. So I don't want to downplay that, but at the same time, what we see is that these platforms that we're using more than ever, all the problems with them. And wouldn't it have been great if in a global pandemic, we had been able to gather in online spaces that respected our autonomy, that respected our well-being, instead of the ones that we got. I mean, I see so many, right? What are 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 14-year-old boys right now doing right now? They're gathering online to play video games and talk to each other while they're playing video games. And that social interaction may be really, really important, and maybe some of the only social interaction they're getting at this point. But wouldn't it be great if they weren't playing games like Fortnite that were deliberately tricking them and has all these design techniques to keep the kids playing, not just for an hour, not just for 2 hours, but all night. And so that when the parents finally come in and say, you really need to turn this off, that there's going to be a huge conflict because the child is completely convinced that they absolutely have to keep playing because of all these tricks and techniques in the game that make the child feel that way. So that's real quickly about the pandemic. On the ed tech front, one of the things that we think is really unfortunate at the Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood is this idea that all remote learning has to equal online learning. There are ways that children can learn online, at home, that don't involve being online, that can be hands-on projects that you can use using real materials, manipulative materials, that you can get offline, go back on the screen to communicate with peers and get some feedback from your teacher and things like that, but not have everything be based around the screen. So one of the things that we did is we created a resource where we looked at all these different types of education that you can do from home, not using a screen, and collected ways that teachers could be doing this. And we encourage families to share this with their schools respectfully. Let's remember what schools are going through right now. We don't want to like be yelling about screen time, but hey, have you considered this? Here's some resources. Because really, you know, Jean and I, you know, when we were giving advice to families the first couple of weeks of this pandemic, we were like, you know, don't worry about screen time. Let's just get through the next few weeks. Now, of course, a few weeks has turned into 9 months. It's, you know, we got a good 6 months ahead of us. And so that the habits that kids are developing right now are really concerning. So, you know, we really hope that the more we get into this and the more that schools really think about what's going on with these screens, that they will start considering some of these alternatives, because it's not good for a kid to be on Zoom from 8:30 till 3.
Great. Well, we have some fantastic questions from our audience, so I think it's time to address some of those. Here's a great question. I think I'm going to jump in with the answer first, and then offer to you guys to be able to give your opinions on it. What feels like a healthy, first of all, I've got to say, this question is about what age, and I tend to say it depends on the child, but it doesn't always depend on the child. Sometimes parents just need a guideline. They just need us to help them put a stake in the ground. So this question is, what feels like a healthy age for a social media account? So I want to say, first of all, that we have a partner called Wait Until 8th. If you've heard the Wait Until 8th program, it's a program that helps parents to be able to delay the smartphone until 8th grade. And so thus, you know, preventing social media from at least 8th grade. But Josh and then Larissa, would you comment on that age?
You know, I don't like to draw a hard line on an age. I mean, I will say, you know, most people probably don't even know this, but, you know, every social media platform that kids are on, they're not supposed to be on if they're under 13. And that, in fact, you get special protections under 13 in terms of what data can be collected from you, how that data can be used. And once you turn 13, all protections are off. So if your kid is lying and saying that they're 13 to get on TikTok or Instagram, then they're losing all of those protections. And I would say, you know, I would say under 13 is certainly, you know, I would advise parents to wait at least until age 13 before letting kids get social media accounts, and to wait longer if you can. I think it's really part of what you need to, you know, what parents know best is what they know their child best. And for children, the ability to be different, to be not where their friends are or where some of their peers are is okay. For other kids, like that feels like life and death. And so that's a judgment call that parents are going to have to make about those kinds of things. I will say, you know, it's so unfortunate that those are the only two choices that we have. Like, deal with all this stuff, like all this horrible stuff coming at you and all this manipulation, or be an outcast. Like, there should be a third option. There should be places where teenagers, not younger kids, but teenagers can go online and gather and not have all this stuff swirling around them, not have all this manipulation, all this persuasive design, not have all of this, you know, trying to film with advertisers. In 2017, I just have to say this, in 2017, Facebook produced a memo for its advertisers saying that they could target teenagers at the moment they were feeling bad about themselves, including when they were feeling bad about their bodies. I mean, that is just, anybody who thinks about the body struggles that teenagers go through, to think that you would see that as a business opportunity, it's just horrifying. So it would be wonderful. I mean, Facebook owns Instagram. It would be wonderful if teens had places to go that weren't built for the advertisers, that were built for them, where they could dip their toe into this stuff, where they could connect with their friends, where they could maybe meet new friends if they were, you know, if you're a gay teenager in a small town in Indiana, maybe it's great to meet and know that there are other gay teenagers out there, but wouldn't it be great if there were other spaces to do that?
Yeah, I agree. You know, not being a parent myself, I'm surrounded by my friends who are parents, and it's hard for me to, you know, give advice on that. But I always look to the other parents and the experts. And in the film, Dr. Jonathan Haidt, who I think works with Dr. Jean Twenge, you know, says that they recommend, you know, at least after middle school. But even 16 has been thrown out there as an age. So I think Jean is right. You know, it really depends on the kid. And it also depends on the ecosystem in which they are operating. But I think it's also important to recognize that as parents and as individuals in the community, there is power in numbers. If the only option, as Josh was saying, is you know, to be part of the chess club at school is to have Facebook so you can get the meetings and notifications. Well, if all of the parents say, let's find a different system that we can get the same information in a different way, you know, the PTAs and other associations, I think, hold a lot of power for how those decisions are made and where those community gathering spaces could actually be.
And I just want to echo what Larissa said, because it's such an important point. You know, whatever parents choose is the right age, we should never, ever have schools making social media use mandatory. That is just something that should never happen. And that is something that parents should speak up about. And I think the film is a perfect opportunity to do this. You know, to say, why are our clubs based on Facebook? Why does my kid have to have a Facebook account if they want to participate in swimming? Have you seen The Social Dilemma? I think that's a great way of starting the conversation.
Great way, Josh. Larissa, I just want to read you a comment in the Q&A box from one of our colleagues, Dr. Richard Freed, who said, "You created a film that engaged my two daughters, 13 and 17, and their dad." That's amazing.
Well, thank you.
Now I'm going to go on to the next question, which is more about societal shifts. I think we mentioned that earlier this evening. So this question is from Elizabeth. It says, "Completely agree that there is a need for business and governments to step up, and the ideal is for technologies and platforms to be made safe by design." That was mentioned at the end of that clip we just watched. But meanwhile, or in addition, what scope might there be for creating social pressure on parents and caregivers to manage access in a positive way? Just like we used to smoke around kids and that's no longer considered socially acceptable, can we make it unacceptable to put a smartphone in a baby's hands?
Great question. Josh, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I think it's tricky. And I definitely think we should make it socially unacceptable to put a smartphone in a baby's hands. But, you know, I think this is part of what happens is this becomes an intensely personal issue, and people feel judged. And then when people feel judged, they shut down. And so I think, you know, having conversations about community values are much better than shaming people for doing something wrong, or doing something that you think is wrong. So Jean mentioned the wait until 8th pledge before. You know, what we love about the pledge is that what it says is, if you know, parents pledge together that they're not going to get their kids smartphones until 8th grade. And so when the kids come to you and say, "Mom, I'm the only one in the class that doesn't have a smartphone," you pull out a list and say, "Well, actually, I can name 9 other kids in your class that don't have a smartphone." And not only that, by pledging together, you're starting to have a conversation about what media your kids are consuming, about what your rules are in your house, about what your rules are when hopefully we get to go to other people's houses again. And so those things are really important. So I think that that's a better approach to it than trying to shame somebody for handing a baby or a smartphone or being on their smartphone, to you know, to create situations like, don't be on your smartphone in front of your baby, or hand your baby a smartphone, and model things of, like, a baby's upset and starts crying. Like, we know the phone will stop the baby from crying. It's the greatest pacifier that ever was invented. But it comes with a lot of downsides, including the fact that that's the only thing that's ever going to soothe that baby again. And so I appreciate the question, and we do need to change societal norms. I just think that we do that by talking as communities about our values, rather than pointing out, "Oh my God, look at that person and what they're doing, and they're a bad parent."
I agree, Josh. I really think the more that we can create community around this and create people raising children in a similar way, having similar values, then the parents will feel peer support and the kids will feel peer support. Larissa, any further comment about social pressure or social norms changing based on the film? Okay, great. So another question we have is how to deal with meltdowns because of studying at home due to COVID-19. So we know based on the film that the meltdowns could be caused by the algorithms, could be caused by what's creating children's drive to stay on, causing them to be gripped. We know that it's not the child's fault, it's not the parent's fault, but it does happen and we need to deal with it.
Yeah, or Josh, do you want to go ahead?
Oh, I thought Jean would. You're the parenting expert, Jean. I thought you were going to answer that one, but I'm happy to go.
No, yes, I'm happy to also. Thank you. Sometimes with 3 people on a panel, it's hard to know who's going next. But also for children who are having meltdowns, it's sometimes easy to back off instead of just grabbing it away. So instead of saying, turn that thing off, to be able to understand what they're doing on it. And one of my favorite things is to be able to have kids doing something on the screen that they can then take off the screen. So a lot of our families are having great success with cooking classes, with painting classes, with things that children can learn on the screen because they can't go to a painting class, they can't go to gymnastics, they can't go to things right now during COVID. But if they're doing something on the screen that's going to keep them on the screen, that's different. If they're learning, if they're playing a video game, for example, and I'm not going to go down that road, but if they're playing a video game, that's going to keep them on the screen. If they're learning something, if they're taking an online class, that's a way to bridge the screen back to real life.
And I also think, like with all temper tantrums, first of all, I think temper tantrums at different ages have different approaches. But, if I do think one of the things that parents sometimes struggle with around media, and particularly during the pandemic, because we understandably are concerned about our kids not having enough to do and not being connected enough, is that we make threats that we don't follow through on. And parenting 101 is that if you're, don't threaten to take away something unless you're prepared to take it away and to stick to it. And I think that that's fairly obvious, but I think a lot of times with the media, it gets thrown around in families, including maybe in mine occasionally, as that's how we're going to, that's the thing we're going to take away, and then we don't follow through, and that sends a clear message to a child.
I see we're almost out of time, but I think we did decide that we have a few extra minutes to stay for some questions. Are you both willing to stay for a few more questions?
Sure.
Fantastic. So we have a really great question here. I am not qualified to answer it, but what other business models are there other than advertising? Oops, I just lost it because another one came in. What business models are there other than advertising business model that is typically used by social media companies? Are there?
There are other business models. There's a subscription-based business model. There are business models where you decide how much you want to pay, and then you can re-up your subscription at some point. I think there are a number of people who are really looking hard at the landscape and saying, is there an opportunity here to evolve and do something different? I think the challenging part is that the advertising-based business model is very profitable. And doesn't come with a lot of, costs that are monetary, that are really easy to relate to that. But it does come with a lot of negative externalities that may not be incorporated into that cost. And that's why you see super high stock prices and then the fallout of all of the things that we've been talking about in this conversation. So, I think there are a lot of smart business people out there that are trying to figure out, how do we pivot? What do we pivot to? Is it subscription? Is it something else? And I think there are pitfalls with all different types of business models when what you're selling is something that, when you think about at the very core and basis, is this something we really want to sell? So I think in relation to sort of what you were saying earlier, I can't speak to meltdowns or things like that, as well as you both can. But one of the things that we learned when we were interviewing people was getting people to really examine, why am I on these platforms? Why am I posting something? One of the subjects would ask the teenagers we did a screening for before the COVID shutdown, why do I feel the need to post this? Am I looking for likes? Am I feeling vulnerable? Am I looking for social approval? Am I lonely? And in getting your kid or yourself and me, even as an individual, even asking ourselves those questions as a team, the film crew was even recognizing, gosh, I'm not sure why I'm engaging in the way that I thought I was engaging. So I think just some of that opening up for conversation can also really help with the motives of why we're feeling what we feel.
And the film does such a great job to lead us into asking ourselves those questions. I think
Can I just say one thing about the business model? And I 100% agree with Larissa that subscription models are much better than advertising-based models, and that's across the board, including with like games and apps, which you pay a very little bit up front or they're free, and then they're constantly trying to sell you more. Having said that, we need to make sure that everybody has access. So if we have subscription models, we need to figure out ways to help low-income families, so we're not excluding them. And I would also say we need public funding for media. I mean, it's, where do people go more than any place else for information? They go to Google, or if they're a younger person, they do most of their searches in YouTube. That's what kids do. And that's also owned by Google. So we have an advertising company controlling where most of us go to look up the answer to something. That doesn't make sense. So we really do need to find a different way of funding that, because we shouldn't be getting our answers about everything we need. When we need a quick answer to something, it shouldn't be coming from an advertising company.
There's an amazing book called Algorithms of Oppression, written by Sophia Noble. And you would be shocked by the things that people Google and what comes up as a result. And in certain instances, these, as Josh said, these search engines are now libraries, and they're defining what the answers are. They're defining who we see as potential role models. If you Google doctor, you will see mostly male white men. You Google rabbi, what do you see? I think, and again, these companies are able to play whack-a-mole to fix one of those problems, individual problems. But if you Google black girls versus white girls, you'll get very different answers in the YouTube search. So I think these are really important, as Josh said, decisions that need public access globally. And without proper funding, we're going to be left with the only funding model that is available, which is the true cost of free, which is not quite so free after all.
Yeah, and I think that does address the question, wouldn't it be equally important to investigate the investment model on which the business model was built? So let me see. We have time for maybe one or two more, and I'm trying to see which ones we haven't answered yet. That are directly related to the film. Oh, one question, Larissa. Netflix uses tricks and algorithms mentioned in the documentary. Is there a conflict of interest here? Is Netflix willing to change the way it works? Is it brave enough to discourage harmful binge watching of recommended content? You may or may not know the answer to that.
It's a great question. And, I'm not a Netflix representative, so I can't speak to all the things. The one thing that I can say is that while Netflix uses recommendations, all of the content that is on Netflix is gathered and curated by a human being. So they have human beings that are choosing and selecting the content, as opposed to YouTube or other search functions or even social media platforms that allow for any content, user-generated content. And that could be, content that we don't want our kids to see. It could be false content and things like that. So when it comes to content moderation, the thing that I can say about Netflix is that they are doing that through humans as opposed through bots or algorithms. And for us as creators, that's really important, because it gets to how do we ensure that the digest, our own diets of what we're consuming has been vetted by people that, have some sort of criteria behind them, as opposed to conspiracy theories or other things.
Fantastic. So we have a few more parenting questions, and I just want to make sure that I mentioned that at the Children's Screen Time Action Network, which is screentimenetwork.org, we have a resource library that's filtered that you may go in and take a look at what the latest resources are. Our most recent one being our Dear Parents Guide. There's our URL, screentimenetwork.org at the bottom, along with some other helpful resources that have been put into the chat box this evening. But the resource library, as well as our webinars that cover many of these topics that we're talking about tonight. Our most recent resource was produced by our teen advisory board members, Eliza Copens and Celine Bernhardt-Lanier, and it's called Dear Parents, and it has messages from teens to parents about what they've always wanted to tell you about their smartphone use, what it means to them, how you could help them, the best way things that you could do to help them, right from the teens themselves. And it also has a conversation guide, a fantastic conversation guide that will help with communication about these issues. So screentimenetwork.org, commercialfreechildhood.org, and The Social Dilemma and Exposure Labs to learn more about the film The Social Dilemma. I'd like to thank Larissa Rhodes, Josh Golan, and thank the Southampton Arts Center for having us this evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you so much. It was great to have you. Everybody have a great night. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.